What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. So, today we're going to talk about three different levels of Les Pauls. Starting with an Epiphone and going up through a Gibson Les Paul Custom. I got my three Les Pauls here. And the point of this is to just kind of weigh the pros and cons of the Epiphone versus like a Gibson USA Standard versus going all the way to like a Gibson Les Paul Custom. If there's any difference in the guitars, which there is, but like what the differences are, the quality differences, that kind of thing. So I guess first let's just kind of do a little overview of the guitars. We'll start with the Epiphone. This is the Epiphone Adam Jones Les Paul Custom. You guys have seen that one. Pretty sure I've talked about all these guitars on the channel. But just real quick, we'll go through them all. So there's the Epiphone. This is my Gibson Les Paul Deluxe that I've routed and pretty much turned into a standard, put full-size humbuckers in it. This is a 2001 model. So this isn't going to be maybe like the fairest comparison because some of these guitars are kind of old. Some of them are brand new. The two Gibsons are really modified. The Epiphone's totally stock. So, I mean, there's a lot of variables here, but I still think, it's a decent kind of comparison and just a good topic to talk about. Like, what's the pros and cons of all this and why you would want to buy this over the Epiphone or why you might want to buy the Epiphone over this, so on and so on. So, USA Gibson Les Paul Deluxe. And then last but not least, my 1987 Gibson Les Paul Custom. So, one of the things to kind of make a note of too is my Les Paul Custom is an 87. In 1987, Gibson didn't have a custom shop. Now they do. And Gibson Les Paul Customs, like if you go buy a brand new Gibson Les Paul Custom, it's made in the custom shop. This one wasn't because custom shop didn't exist in 1987. So, factor that in somehow, if you will. I don't think it's kind of relevant, but not super relevant. So, we'll kind of dive into these now. Kind of talk about why some of them are more expensive than others, and how that equates to value and all that kind of stuff. So we'll go back to the Epiphone. So, we'll start here. This is, I guess you could consider it like a high-end Epiphone. So this guitar was $12.99 brand new, I think. Yeah. So, the Gibson USA, a brand new Gibson USA Les Paul Standard is about $3,000. A brand new Gibson Les Paul Custom is between $5,000 and $6,000, depending on which finish you get. The white finish is like $5,800, I think. The black one is right at like $5,000. When we get to that guitar, we'll kind of talk about why maybe one finish is more expensive than the other. There's a reason. It isn't just arbitrary. So, all right. So let's start here. The Epiphone. So the Epiphone, this one has an ebony fingerboard. It's got like Gibson electronics in it, CTS potentiometers, orange drop caps. It's got a Seymour Duncan distortion pickup in it. It does have an Epiphone Pro Bucker in the neck, so this is like a Chinese-made Epiphone pickup, right? It doesn't have any kind of name brand tuning keys on it. Let's kind of ignore the limited art thing that's going on with this guitar. Like if this was just a regular kind of, because this doesn't really affect anything other than like this guitar is a little more expensive because of this. Like a regular Epiphone Les Paul Custom is like $750, $800, I think. So you're paying like the Adam Jones tax and the art tax. So we've talked about that already with this. But as far as Epiphones go, this is very top of the line Epiphone. But there are some things that do make it cheaper, and that doesn't necessarily mean the quality is less. This guitar plays very well. The fretwork's done very well. The finish feels really nice. it is polyurethane, so that's a big difference between the Epiphones and the Gibsons. The Gibsons are nitrocellulose finish. The Epiphone is polyurethane. Now, that doesn't mean cheaper. It just means different. So, some people might actually prefer the polyurethane. It's a more durable finish. It doesn't age like nitro does. It doesn't check and crack nearly as fast or easily. So, there are pros to this. So, why does this guitar only cost $1,200 versus, these? Well, for one, it's made in China, so labor cost is less because it's overseas. So if you don't know anything about wood, there's different grades of wood and different quality of wood. So when manufacturers are buying wood, there's different, like, not all mahogany is the same. It's not all created equal. Like, when the people that source the wood go out and cut down trees, they grade the wood. And certain grades of wood will cost more than others. So, a company like Epiphone doesn't buy the higher grade of wood like Gibson does. Now, you already know my opinion about tone wood. I don't really think it matters that much, but when it comes to, like, as far as, like, the sound of the guitar goes, I don't really think it matters a whole lot. But it does as far as cost goes. Like, as far as the production cost of the instrument goes. If you buy more expensive wood, you're going to have to charge more money to pay for the cost of that wood. So if you buy cheaper wood, you don't have to charge as much for the guitar. So, cheaper wood, cheaper hardware, right? So this hardware is Epiphone branded hardware. It's made in China, probably. It doesn't cost as much as the Gibson hardware. I might be mistaken here, but I think the Gibson hardware is like Advanced Plating. It's a company that makes most of the Gibson hardware. They're based out of Germany. It's a lot higher quality hardware. It's more expensive. It's a lighter weight metal. It's a little more durable. So it costs more money to manufacture. And again, it's in a European country, so the production cost is higher. So you're putting more expensive hardware on there. So this has got a little cheaper hardware. This one came with a Seymour Duncan pickup because it was the Adam Jones. It's the Adam Jones model. But a regular Epiphone would have just two Epiphone Pro Buckers in it. So Epiphone branded, cheaper pickups, right? Cheaper tuning keys. So, and again, that doesn't necessarily mean bad. That doesn't equate to, like, lesser than. It just means cheaper, right? Like, this hardware is fine. Over time, it might be a little less, like, quality than that. Admittedly, over time, this might wear out a little faster, or you might want to replace it. The tolerances, like how tight the screws are, might be a little, like, the bridge might wiggle a little bit versus those, like, the holes and the like, screws might not be quite as tight with each other. Just little things like that, right? But when you're buying an imported Asian guitar, that's kind of what you expect, right? And again, we're talking about, like, microns of differences and things, right? So all of that stuff adds up, though. The more and more of that stuff you stack onto a guitar, the more expensive it's going to be, or the cheaper it's going to be if you're, cutting things, right? So, but does that necessarily equate to this guitar costing over twice as much as the Epiphone? It's a lot of factors. Like I said, production cost of labor. People in America get paid more money than people that work overseas. So if you work on the Gibson factory line to produce a guitar like this, you get paid a lot more than Chinese workers do. So you have to factor that into the cost of the instrument, right? But is this guitar twice as good as the Epiphone? No, I don't think so. I think good is kind of a unquantifiable term, if you will, right? Like, it all comes down to people's preferences. Like, I've owned this guitar a long time. I got this guitar when I was 17 years old. the nitrocellulose finish feels different than the polyurethane. And I've been playing this guitar for so long, I prefer the way nitrocellulose feels. Now, does that justify it costing $2,000 more than that guitar? If you don't have the money, probably not, right? If you don't have a preference, if you've never owned a nitro guitar and you don't have a preference about how this feels, then probably not. But I do own a nitrocellulose guitar, and I've played it a long time, and when you play as much as I do, that preference to me does kind of matter. I do prefer the way this feels, and I'm fortunate enough to where I don't mind paying the extra money for that preference. Like, it doesn't bother me, so that's why I have guitars like this. And again, you know, little higher quality hardware, just things like that. Now, when we get to the custom, right, so I think there is kind of a, I won't say like clear difference, but there is kind of a like understandable difference between these two, right? Like Chinese guitar, Chinese like OEM hardware and pickups and stuff like that versus an American made guitar with American made pickups and American labor. You're like, okay, this guitar costs $1,200. This guitar costs $2,800, whatever it is. Now it's like I can kind of see the difference here between this and this. All right. I think where it starts to get wacky for some people is when you bring a guitar like this into the equation. Okay. You're like, well, this is also an American made guitar by the same company. Why does it cost twice as much as this guitar? Right? So, one thing about the white finish specifically is I know from talking to people that do nitrocellulose finish on guitars that white is a little hard to work with. It's hard to mix up and get just right. It's hard to keep it clean. You have to have like a totally kind of like sterile environment. If any kind of specks of like dust or anything like that get in to the white, it's super noticeable. Like on a black guitar, you can't really see it quite as much. There might be some imperfections in the paint that you just can't see because it's black. So that's why the white guitar has a little bit of a premium on it versus even like say a black Les Paul Custom. It's because the white finish is just harder to deal with. But why does a custom cost so much more than a standard? Well, like I said, now, especially because they're made in the custom shop. So people that work at the like standard Gibson USA plant make more money than people that work at China. Well, you can kind of assume that the people that work in the custom shop make more money than the people that work at just like the standard plant. They also don't make as many guitars, and they're buying the highest, like grades of wood they can. So more expensive wood, more expensive labor. Like, that's kind of what it always comes back to, really. Like, the perceived quality of the guitars is really just a byproduct of more expensive materials, more expensive labor. There's an assumption that if I buy more expensive materials and I pay someone who's more experienced for their more expensive labor, the guitar will be, quote, better. That's not necessarily the case. There's only so good anything can be, right? Like, so this guitar isn't twice as good as this guitar. The more expensive a guitar becomes, you reach this point that I call the point of diminishing returns, right? Like, a $600 guitar is very clearly 3 times as good as a $200 guitar. Like, it's pretty obvious when you pick up a $600 guitar and a $200 guitar. Like, one of these is very clearly leagues better than the other one. When you're talking about $5,000 guitars versus $3,000 guitars, it might not be clearly better. There might be little things here you like more, but you're not talking about like a huge jump in quality. You're talking about things like, uh, you know, maybe it's more like cosmetic things. Maybe it's more like for example, the customs. You got the big block inlay, so there's an extra inlay. The binding is more intricate. It's like 7-ply binding. You've got the headstock inlay. You got the gold hardware. There's just like little things that kind of stack up. You know, you got binding on the back. You don't have on the standards. You've got binding on the headstock. You don't have on the standards. There's some other things that go into it, right? It isn't just this guitar's twice as good. That's not how it works. It's twice as expensive. It's not twice as good. And you might be thinking, well, what's the point of that then? Well, if you don't care about this kind of stuff, then there isn't a point. Fair enough, right? If you don't care about all these other little kind of things, then go buy an Epiphone or go buy a standard. Like, whatever you are comfortable with spending the money on. That's why there's so many different levels of these things, right? Like, one isn't necessarily better or worse than the other one. It's just companies like to hit different price brackets to accommodate as many people as possible. There are people that want to spend $6,000 on a guitar, so they make a guitar for those people. There are people that want to spend $1,200 on a guitar, so they make guitars for those people. There are people that want to spend $500 on a guitar, so they make guitars for those people, like so on and so on, right? Like, quality and like better and good are all like super subjective kind of things. So to a degree, like I said, clearly with a, you know, if you have a $150, $200 guitar versus a $600-$700 guitar, you can tell a giant leap in the actual quality of the instruments, like. But that's not necessarily. But like I said, once you get up into these like really expensive guitars, plus $1,500, let's say like $1,500 and up, there's really not a huge jump in quality and like goodness or betterness of a guitar, right? Like, not really. It's all about perception, and it's all about preferences and little things here and there that might add to the cost of the guitar, like the fingerboard edges being hand rolled, or it having stainless steel frets, or it having, you know, aftermarket pickups stock, or it having a custom finish or something they don't normally offer, right? Like, and if you're not into that kind of stuff, that's fair, but you just have to understand that that's why some of these things cost more money. It isn't necessarily because they're better. That's not even really the point. The point is that they're different. Maybe even like limited runs of things, you know, limited editions, collector's choices, those kind of things. Like take like the Gibson Adam Jones Les Pauls, for example, like the custom shop ones, right? Those are more collectibles. Like, why do those guitars cost $10,000? Well, because they're really collectibles. They just happen to be guitars that you can play, which is cool, but it's more about having something limited edition, having accurate recreation of an iconic guitar, like something you can hang on your wall and like display that you happen to be able to just play too, right? Like, people collect baseball cards and all kinds of things, right, that are worth tons of money that you can't really do anything with. They just sit there, right? So guitars have the unique kind of perspective of you actually can do something with them. You can play them, you can create music with them. But there is still a collectability aspect to it, especially when it comes to vintage guitars, rare guitars, limited editions, artist signatures, all that kind of stuff, right? It's all about the collectability of those things. So don't get too caught up in it. Don't get too hung up on, like, I have to have this $6,000 guitar to be good or something like that, right? Don't get caught up on that. And don't get caught up on, like, oh man, I only have this $400 or $500 guitar or whatever, right? Like, you can make them sound great and make them play great, and they can do, amazing. You can do amazing things with those instruments. Like I have a Squire Strat right over here, like right off of camera, and like a guitar sounds awesome and it plays great, and I really like it. Don't get hung up on like the price and the perceived quality of things. Like you're kind of if you get consumed with that, you're kind of losing the point. The point is to get the gear, to get the equipment that you like, that makes you happy, that does the thing you want it to do. If that is a $500 guitar, awesome. If it's a $5,000 guitar, awesome. Just don't lose sight of like the big picture of it all, about what it's really about. It's really about learning the instrument, creating music, writing music, and enjoying yourself with this hobby and having fun with it. So, thank you guys for watching the video. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, all that stuff. Share the video. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this price versus quality kind of stuff. Said I use Gibson as an example just because I happen to own a bunch of different Gibsons and Epiphones and stuff. I could kind of draw a clear line with that brand. But I mean, this applies to all brands, whether it be Fender and Squire, or ESP, LTD, whatever it might be. Like, all brands have this going on with them, right? From all the way from really entry-level guitars up to like custom shop things. So, hope you guys liked the video. Thanks. I'll be back next week.